and did his first presentation on Native American settlements. When we surveyed the membership back earlier this year and asked about topics they'd be interested in hearing about, this was near the top. Very strong interest in Native American settlements and trails. And so I asked Silas if he'd come back, and he's brought back the talk, and I'll turn it over to him. So, Silas, you're on.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. As Ray introduced me, my name is Silas Bialecki, and I grew up here in Manchester Township out on Noggles Road in the southwest corner. And so my interest in Native Americans started way back as a boy, growing up, going out in the woods, playing in the woods. Of course, your imagination is running wild. And then there was the day I found my first arrowhead. And then just a week or two ago, I found out that my dad had actually planted that arrowhead for me to find. And, well, it worked anyway, so I guess I'll give him that. And then more recently, I've been very interested in primitive and pre-industrial skills and technologies. And a lot of that is centered around how the Native Americans lived their lives without metal and without, coal or any of the things that we associate with the early settlers who roughed it out. So I thought, what better way to learn about than to dive into my own very specific home and see what I could learn about what they were doing to kind of further my own interest in that. So I think it's really important that we try and keep this information alive. I think 10,000 years of people living in Michigan is a long time to accumulate a wealth of knowledge and information and just amazing, amazing culture that, really would be a shame if we lost that. And so I'm really glad you're all here tonight. So on one hand, I want to look back in history, but I also want to remind us that there are Native Americans still living in the area, and they're still practicing their old ways. They're still passing on traditions and oral stories and knowledge from their forefathers and mothers. And so this information isn't something dead to be exhumed and kind of looked at through a microscope. It's still very much living. And so I'm just offering one aspect of Native American culture. And in the end, a lot of what I'm going to be talking about is specific tangible things like trails and artifacts and places that we can look at. And I'm not going to be talking so much about culture because I'm not Native American. I haven't studied it extensively. And so I don't want to try and speak for people who are here that can speak for themselves. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about the general swath of history regarding human habitation in Michigan and how that pertains to, of course, our very small corner of Michigan. And then I have a map where I've mapped out everything that I've found about Native Americans in the Manchester area. So, like I said, humans have been in Michigan for 10,000 years, 11,000 years, depending on how you date it and who you ask. And so we kind of have to wonder who were the very first people to come through. And we don't really know, to be honest. We know that there are stone artifacts that date to about 11,000 years ago, and that's about all we know. We can assume that they were hunters coming through as the glaciers retreated. Grasslands were one of the first ecosystems to kind of colonize this new opened up landscape. And of course, grasslands mean megafauna like mammoths and mastodons and other things that are eating those grasses, and that means predators like humans. So as the glaciers are retreating, humans are following their prey into this area. And that's about all we know. And then starting around 6,000 years ago, we have signs of the first kind of copper working in northern Michigan. And so these are people who are obviously they've got a culture going. They're working copper, they're making art, they're making weapons, they're making jewelry, tools, what have you, and they're trading it. We find copper artifacts down here. We find copper artifacts in Florida that scientists can say came from the UP of Michigan. But these are still relatively unknown people. The only thing we have are occasional copper artifacts and occasional stone artifacts to really learn anything about them. And in the end, basically a stone tool is used for killing something or cutting something. And so it's a pretty basic knowledge that we have of them. And then starting around 2,000 years ago and kind of leading up to an ending around the time of Jesus' birth, maybe 100 AD or right around then. Again, we don't know for certain. You have what are called the mound builders. And these are tribes that built mounds for burial purposes, ceremonial purposes. They often built earthworks that we're not even sure still if they were defensive forts or just ceremonial enclosures. And these mound builders, who kind of culminated in I don't want to say a tribe, it's almost like we say Western civilization when we talk about Europe, Canada, North America, we would say the Hopewell culture. And so it's almost 2,000 years of multiple different tribes and nations culminating in a similar culture that kind of flourished right around the time of Jesus' birth and disappeared soon after. And so they were building these mounds. They got as far north as the Muskegon River. But most famously in our area, actually down by Tecumseh, they had an earthwork that was a circle that was attached to a square. And so this earthwork was about 6 feet tall. Early accounts said there were trees planted on top of this earthwork, and it was used for ceremonies, dances, councils, really a lot of things. And Tecumseh was kind of a big hub. There was an actual more permanent settlement in Tecumseh more recently, but it all started with these mound builders and the Hopewell culture almost 2,000 years ago. So then the Hopewell and the mound builders really mysteriously disappeared, which is evidenced by the fact that when the first settlers came to the area and into the Ohio River Valley, which is where the mound builders were really had their greatest concentration, settlers came in and asked the natives who were living there then, what are all these mounds? And the natives were like, we don't know. And so that's kind of how mysterious this disappearance of these cultures were. So after that, we have what we consider the tribes that we're familiar with. And those are the Ottawa, Ojibwa, Potawatomi, the Huron. And I'm first going to talk about the Ottawa, Ojibwa, and Potawatomi. These were a large, powerful 3 tribes that were closely allied, and they were called the Council of Three Fires. And so their origin story has it that they came from the East Coast. They were told by a spirit or a wise man or what have you that they were in danger and they needed to move to the place where they needed to move to the place where food grows on water. So they moved up the St. Lawrence Seaway. And really interestingly, they still have it in their stories that they can identify certain points along their approximately 500-year migration where they split off into these separate tribes. So they got to Quebec, they got to Montreal, they got to Ottawa, they got to the area of Detroit. And at these places, tribes like the Ottawa or the Ojibwa split off and formed smaller, more cohesive units. So about the time that the first European explorers were coming through Michigan in the early 1600s, these tribes were these Council of Three Fires were actually just getting to the area themselves in some ways. They were kind of finishing their migration, and they had found wild rice, which was the food that grows on water. And it was really a staple in their diets as they got up. It's more of a northern species, but we did have it come down south. I know right at the Sharon Mill Pond, there's actually still a patch of the river variety of wild rice. So it was very much a staple in their diets, and they came and they found it and they said, this is where we're supposed to be. And in that, they started pushing other tribes out that were here before. There are some tribes known as the Mascoutin, the Sauk and Fox, which the Sauk is what the Sauk Trail is named after, were here. And so these tribes coming from the East Coast pushed them out, and that was something that was really confusing for the Europeans because all these tribes, it's a period of great upheaval, and they're not sure who's who. And so even a lot of these tribes that they were pushing out is really lost to history, even more than the Hopewell, because they weren't building mounds, they weren't leaving such diagnostic features in the same way. So, Europeans are coming in, the first explorers are coming in the early 1600s. And we have what are called the Beaver Wars. So the Iroquois who live in New York, fueled by trade, they push west and essentially wage war on the natives that are living in the Michigan area. And for almost all the 1600s, Michigan is empty of settlements and any sort of really permanent living situation. You have roving war parties, so the Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Ottawa got pushed out to Wisconsin, the UP, and so they would send war parties into Michigan to meet the Iroquois, and for almost a century you have basically just war in Michigan. Largely empty. And then in 1701 you have the Great Peace of Montreal, and then this is after the tribes pushed out have started to push back in, peace is made, and they move back to the area in 1701. And Antoine de Moth Cadillac, who is the leader at the fort at Detroit, invites natives specifically back to the Detroit area to increase trade and kind of revitalize trade in the region. But also he wants to stop the English from coming over. He's a Frenchman. He wants to stop the English. So he's like going to get a whole bunch of native allies, put them right here at this really critical spot. And so that's when we have the Potawatomi moving back into the region, southern Michigan largely. And so when the settlers came, most of who they met were either Potawatomi or the Huron Indians, who were largely settled along the Huron River, which is who they're named for, or who the river is named for. Yeah. So settlers are coming in. 1823 was the first permanent settlement in Washtenaw, as far as I can tell. But in 1807, in the Treaty of Detroit, the last land was traded or ceded away from the natives to the settlers. So 1807, you have the last it's official, white people now own this land, and very soon after, natives start disappearing from the region. So, what else was I going to say about that? So yeah, when the settlers got here, they find a wide open, you probably have heard about the oak savannas or the black oak barrens that were in this region, and that was really largely a result of the Native Americans setting fire to the landscape and using this fire for multiple reasons. Sometimes it's for warring reasons, other times it's as warning to other tribes. Maybe they're just trying to reduce the underbrush and give room for grasses to grow so that their prey, deer, buffalo, these kinds of things can come into the region and eat the green grass that's now kind of liberated from dead grass that's kind of pushed down everything. And I really feel that if there was one thing that we can do to kind of restore and reinvigorate the native presence on the landscape, and that's is reapplying fire to the landscape in a controlled, safe fashion. I'm not advocating going and setting a match somewhere just because you think it'd be fun. No, it's become a science of prescribed fire and reintroducing fire to the landscape, because there are a lot of plant and animal species that rely on fire because they had 10,000 or more years to kind of co-evolve and with Native Americans lighting fires. So I think that's something we can really, if we want to kind of do justice as best we can, or kind of rectify some of the wrongs we've done, that's a really big thing we can do. So, I think 10,000 years, as I've mentioned, is a really long time for humans to live in a place and kind of grow a culture and a knowledge. And even though we have done very well at wiping them out from this area and kind of obliterating a lot of native sign and whatnot, what have you, from the landscape, there are things apart from roads that still mirror old trails. There's a lot of cultural things that affect us in our day-to-day life. Michigan, the word Michigan comes from an Ojibwe word meaning big water. this thing that we're all so proud of, is really came from something that's hundreds of years old, way before we got here. The name of Washtenaw County comes from the name of the Grand River, which was Awashtenong-Sippy, which means the land of the river of the faraway water. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the Grand, Michigan's longest river, was called the river of the faraway water, referring to Lake Michigan. And it doesn't make much sense until you recognize that when Washtenaw County was being incorporated, it included the headwaters of the Grand River. And the Grand River was such an important artery to people at the time, settlers, traders, and the natives. This whole county was named after that river. And there are even accounts of the Manchester area being called, and I'm not 100% on the pronunciation, but something along the lines of Massawasid Senabawagan, and it means land of the velvet. And there's an account of one Dr. Finch who wrote down that he had seen on the trails in the area a covering of the softest, most finest grass he'd ever seen. And so that's just kind of a testament to what was here before and how that affected the natives, that they named this place after this grass that grew on the trails here. So, and really, Senabawagan, the second half of that, translates to silk or silk stuff, and I haven't found a direct translation of Massawasid yet. And I haven't had a chance to speak with a native speaker to find it out. But it's kind of funny, there's a dictionary done by, I believe, Frederick Baraga, and it's called A Dictionary of the Ojibwe Language. And you look up what Massawasid Senabawagan means, and it just says Manchester. And you can go find just the second half of that in the dictionary, which translates to silk stuff, but the first half of that is not in the dictionary. So it's really still a mystery how that Massawasid ties into the rest of the name. So that's kind of a broader generalization of the history of Native people in Michigan and a little bit about the greater southeast area and Manchester area. So now I have a map that I've kind of made. This isn't it. That kind of highlights trails, settlement areas that I've found. And so I'll bring that up, point out things, and we'll talk through that for a moment. So I created this map on Google. Google has a really amazing tool called Google Maps where you can go and use the Google Maps that you're familiar with, maybe, to create your own maps and put in your own markings, lines, and that kind of a thing. And it's really user-friendly, so you don't need to be a computer whiz necessarily to use this software and create your own maps that you can then share with people. You just send it to them like an email, and then they can edit it if they want to, and that kind of a thing. So I'll just get you oriented here. This orange heart, that's Manchester. This black line coming down is 52, and this black line coming across is Austin Road. And it's not marked in black because it was originally a trail, but this green line coming here is US 12, the Great Sauk Trail, which really closely mirrors, so 12, the highway, very closely mirrors this trail that came through from Detroit to Chicago and beyond. You know, it's really, to say it was just one trail is kind of a misnomer. You know, there are branches and all sorts of different ways to go about it. And, you know, 12 goes through Clinton, but there are reports that at the time of the highway being built, I believe it was okay, I'm not going to try and remember who it was, but somebody had a powerful friend in politics, and they wanted the highway to go through their town in Clinton. So they asked that the trail actually be rerouted from its original, they asked that the highway be rerouted from the trail down to Clinton, into Lenawee County. And so they actually think that the trail, before it went down to Clinton, actually came up here, crossed right in the what I know as Podunk. I'm sure there are other names for it. and then came down right through here across English Road, past Iron Creek Mill Pond, and reconnected with the actual trail down here by Wampler's Lake. So I think that's really cool that, this really... Question?
I just, something about that, because I looked it up and I can't remember the name either. The weird thing is that in the books, the history books, it said he moved the trail 5 miles south.
Uh-huh.
And 5 miles takes you to Austin Road, not to Photo Lake.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and...
Now, they could have got 5 miles mixed up with 2.5.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, who knows what they were thinking. And it's true. Austin Road is very windy and curvy. It's not like a lot of the kind of modern straight line roads that we see today. And that's, this trail here came from up Pittsfield Charter Township, came across, and so you see there are all like these, maybe they didn't want to go here, they wanted to go up to this lake. So instead of walking down here and taking this trail up, 10,000 years is a really long time to create trails. A really long time. And so maybe 500 years ago, a tribe really liked this lake, so they would always come this way. And then 400 years ago, the next tribe that was kind of living in the area really liked Manchester, so they would come this way. And so on and so forth. And it's really amazing how long a trail will last. There are still accounts, and I have yet to find one. I've done a lot of sleuthing recently, and it's mostly inhibited by private property, land ownership, but there are accounts of still being able to see trails, and not even places where roads have been disused that were originally trails, like literally just footpaths that never got turned into roads, that are still visible in the right time of year. And one of those I know is one of those accounts is right here. Another one is up here. That it's basically, most of the trails in the area got plowed up. Settlers came along, they had their own roads, so they plowed up the trail. But in few special places on hillsides where it was too steep to plow, you still have these trail remnants. So, I'm still searching to actually set my foot down on a trail that was originally laid down how many hundreds of years ago? I don't know. So, maybe one of the most recent and I think kind of interesting relations to Native Americans in the Manchester area, and maybe some of you remember this from your childhood, but in 1965 there was a Native American skeleton found just in the southwest corner of Manchester, the village, next to an old airport. And maybe somebody can remind me the name of the airport? Schaefer, yeah. And there's still a road down there, Schaefer Court, that kind of pays homage to that airport. Or maybe it's the person who lived there and it wasn't for the airport. But maybe even when they were leveling that airport, they found this skeleton, and it was determined to be a young Native American woman. And that's 1965. That's just 100 years after maybe the last natives were coming through. So I think that's really kind of a testament to just how, yeah?
One of the things I read about that skeleton was found, the University of Michigan Museum of Archaeology thought that she may have lived in the area 10,000 years ago. So she might have been one of the original.
Wow. Yeah.
I believe she's still on display at the University of
The
Michigan.
university sent it back to Manchester.
Only
Yeah, no-
for a short visit.
Excuse
She was on display here for the students, from what I read.
Yeah?
Does anybody else have any more to add?
Hasn't it Jan Hoover and
Yeah,
one other one?
yeah.
I can't remember who the other one was. Do you, Jan? It was Jan Hoover and
Does anyone
who the
own
other
a
chick was?
blue Jeep Ford Explorer?
Anyone own a blue Jeep Ford Explorer? Maybe their lights are on, or maybe it's in the way. Blue Jeep Ford Explorer. Or wait, no, wait. So,
You can have a Jeep.
yeah, I was going to say, that doesn't quite make sense. Is it a Jeep or a Ford? A Jeep, okay.
From what I read, she was.
Nobody? Nobody has a,
I think
Because
that's
it's
not.
standing right there.
and it's in the way?
Our parking spot.
Gotcha.
Spot
So that's where it gets confusing, because I know that
Yeah.
the university center back of Manchester.
Nobody has a blue Explorer?
Going around.
Oh, she is? Okay, gotcha.
For relatively short, children were like
Would you please repeat what they're asking back there?
They're discussing where that Native American skeleton went to.
Oh, but it started out with something like 10,000 years ago.
She was saying that it might have been a skeleton from 10,000 years ago. That it might have been that well preserved. That it's that old of a skeleton.
Yeah, one of the Hoovers found that. And what are those symbols on the map?
I'm getting to it. That's my dad. I can give him a hard time. After he planted that point, you know. So to my knowledge, we don't know where the skeleton is, but I would love to be proven wrong. So this little skeleton marks that roughly, and these two skeleton are rough approximations of where there might have been a Native American burial site. And this one is in W.B. Hinsdale's Archaeological Atlas of Michigan, which is a really awesome book about Michigan-wide, about natives in the area. But he was often known to fudge locations to save culture, which I think is really cool, because people would come dig things up looking for artifacts and that kind of thing. So he would purposefully put things in the wrong spot to put off grave robbers and the like. And so I'm going to take a chance here, because I found it quite easily in other records. It didn't seem like it was that much of a secret to me that around Hensey Road, where Hensey Road crosses Iron Creek, there was a Native American burial. And even accounts of mounds in that area that I have not seen. Again, private property and getting access to those places is hard. And I think it's really interesting that you take what could have been, at one point, the route of the original Sauk Trail, and it passes right over that burial spot there. So, and you could imagine that where there's a good place to put a road across the Iron Creek is a good place to cross on foot. You know, I think that I have a theory that where there's good topography for roads to cross and good topography to build dams is also good topography to cross a river on foot. And so it's no coincidence to me that there was it's hard to see on this map right now, but there was a crossing right at Manchester. And then, you know, hundreds of years later, settlers come in, and maybe to some degree the trail led them to that spot, but they that for all these different reasons, topography has helped humans, and for different reasons, but we all are gravitated towards the same area. And I think that's a really cool kind of aspect of how we're not so different in the end. You know, we think that Native Americans may be this really mystical, crazy, different thing, but they're humans, and a lot of the things that they look for are things that we look for. So, some other quick things. There's an account of a planting ground right at the head of what's now Iron Creek Mill Pond. And I do know that some artifacts have been found there. And you can imagine that if they had a planting ground there, they were also spending time living there. You know, you can't just plant a crop and walk away from it and expect it to come back and have it be. So you can imagine that they were spending a lot of time there. These two dots are mounds that are described in W.B. Hinsdale's Archaeological Atlas of Michigan. And some of these, I have notes on all these things.
Where are those mounds? I see it on 12.
Yeah, it's right on 12, and I have driven by there multiple times and haven't seen anything from the road. And it's also very likely that they just got leveled. So much of the earthworks that were in the area across Michigan really just got leveled, either by grave robbers or just farmers who needed that spot to grow crops. Oh, okay. let's see. And so I should have, all these green lines, maybe you picked it up already because you're smart cookies. They're all representative of trails, and they come from different resources. A lot of them come from that book I've been referencing, W.B. Hinsdale's Archaeological Atlas of Michigan. Some of them come from firsthand accounts of early to middle settlers. And you know, multiple people have made maps of trails over the years. And actually Ray gave a pretty awesome presentation a few months ago about what we can learn about Manchester from the early maps that were made. And a lot of those early maps showed Native American trails. So I do want to zoom in on, well, I outsmarted myself, and you can make layers of information appear and disappear on this. And now I have to find one of those layers again. I want to talk about some of the place names. I think it's really amazing how much, you know, not only do we know that Masawasid Senebawagan is the name of Manchester, but we know that Iron Creek and Iron Creek Mill Pond were once called Biwabico, and that translates to iron in Ojibwe language. And another aspect of how we just think of it as Iron Lake, but really that information is coming from hundreds of years ago. And settlers took that, translated it to English, and it continues to be the name today, even if it's in a different language. And very much, Iron Creek is littered with springs in its watershed, and a lot of those springs are very iron rich. You walk up to this spring and it'll be like a reddish color with all the iron that's coming out of this water. And I'm sure a lot of you have actually iron rich water. I know my house has very iron rich water, and it wreaks havoc on everything. And then there's a small lake, which was very kind of important to me to learn about. I grew up across from this lake on Noggles Road. Down here you have Sharon Hollow coming down, and Noggles Road actually kind of runs up this way here. But this lake, we now call it Whelan Lake after